So it's an important topic that we talk about our times and what's going on in our current culture today, and how that is underlying some of our founding values, which are critical to our freedoms. And so I'm going to touch on a brief history lesson. So in September 1787, when Ben Franklin was leaving Independence Hall, he was asked, "What kind of government have the founders proposed?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." Based on their direct knowledge of history, the founding fathers understood that unlimited power tends to become a tyrannical power. And so they created the United States as a republic. The key difference between a republic and a democracy is that a republic limits the power of government. So we have a republic state because of the fact that our Constitution limits the power of government. So Thomas Paine, who was the author of the famous pamphlet Common Sense, supported the revolution against the British, and he wrote in Thoughts on Defensive War, "I am fully convinced that spiritual freedom is the root of political liberty. First, because till spiritual freedom was made manifest, political liberty did not exist. Secondly, because in proportion that spiritual freedom has been manifested, political liberty has increased. Thirdly, whenever the visible church has been oppressed, political freedom has suffered with it. As the union between spiritual freedom and political liberty seems nearly inseparable, it is our duty to defend both." Many who immigrated to America came for religious freedom. And it's important to note that the church, unlike the situation in many cases today, during this time was the center point for political debate and discussion on the relevant news of the day. The Black Robe Regiment was a group of pastors in the colonies who were preaching led to the Great Awakening. At the time of the American Revolution, they led their congregation into the battle for freedom. It was because of the Great Awakening that our founding fathers had the conviction of the Bible. They realized that slavery was wrong, but had they proposed it at the time, abolishing slavery, it would have meant certain death for all slaves. Instead, the men began to move in the direction of the abolitionist movement to free the slaves. The 56 signers of the unanimous Declaration of Independence had varied backgrounds, ages, education, and social status. They understood the gravity of their actions in signing that document, that they were essentially placing a death warrant on their heads. They mutually pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. The Republican Party was founded in 1854 by former members of the Whig Party who met in Wisconsin to establish a new party to oppose the spread of slavery in the Western territories. By 1960, the majority of Southern slave states were publicly threatening secession if the Republicans won the presidency. But as we know in history, in November 1860, Republican Abraham Lincoln was elected president. 6 weeks later, South Carolina seceded, and shortly after that, many other Southern states seceded from the Union. In April 1961, the Civil War began over the issue of slavery. And at the time, more than 4 million people were held as slaves in the 15 southern states. President Lincoln abhorred slavery as a moral evil, and he was determined to abolish it. In a message to Congress in December 1862, he said, "We know how to save the Union. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just, a way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless." On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. The Civil War was won by the Union in June 1865 when the Confederate forces surrendered. And the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which abolished the institution of slavery, was ratified in December 1865. We must recognize that America is the only country that has fought a war to abolish slavery. So we recently celebrated the 245th birthday of our great nation. And we have come a long way as a nation in ensuring freedom and equal rights for all. But how are we doing with regard to holding the nation together? Matthew 12:25 says, "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand." We are a nation divided, but that is not by accident. Furthermore, the freedoms and values of our founding documents are being threatened. Proverbs 9:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight." What happens when you take God out of society? If we remove the Judeo-Christian foundation from our society, it will collapse. Without God, there is no wisdom. There's no moral fabric. 2 Corinthians 4:4 says, "The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that displays the glory of Christ, who is the image of God." Secularists may be learned, but they lack wisdom because they don't know God. The consequences of secularism throughout history include fascism, Nazi Germany, and communism, Vietnam, the former Soviet Union, Cuba, and Venezuela. These dictatorial governments, the ultimate authority is the state. But in order for that to be true, there must be no God. America was founded as one nation under God, and we have been the target of the communists for decades. In 1963, a list of 45 communist goals that were published in the best-selling book, The Naked Communist, back in the height of the Red Scare in 1958, was read into the congressional record. The purpose was to raise awareness of these goals and how they explicitly erode American values and traditions. I will mention some that are relevant to this forum as I continue, because the current state of our nation and society makes sense when you see it through the lens of the communist playbook. One is get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. Discredit the American founding fathers. Present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the big picture. Infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the ground that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. Infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, policy-making positions. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion picture. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. Present homosexuality and degeneracy and promiscuity as normal, natural, and healthy. Support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture, education, social agencies, welfare programs, mental clinics, etc. Create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and use united force to solve economic, political, and social problems. And this one will really get you. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents, attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to the suppressive influence of parents. So when you reflect on the changes that have occurred in our society over the last 60 years, how far do you think the communists have come in achieving their goals? So let's look at a few areas. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx wrote about class warfare, the working class against the ruling class. And Antonio Gramsci advised Benito Mussolini, who was the fascist dictator of Italy after World War I, that violence was not the only way to create a revolution. He talked about a quiet revolution that can occur by changing a worldview. It is what is called the long march through the institutions and areas of thought. Academia, the news, entertainment, the churches, and once you get the thought leaders on your side, you can change the worldview of the population. Once the worldview of the population is changed, they are easier to conquer and usher in communism. Saul Alinsky is popularly known as the father of community organizing. He considered himself a radical who wrote this book, Rules for Radicals, a pragmatic primer for realistic radicals in 1971. The dedication is to Lucifer, whom he acknowledges as the original radical. He says, you must divide a host culture. You have to get the people fighting with each other, and then it will fall. He proposes that you get a culture to be at war with itself via community organizing. You may recall that community organizer was on the resume of one of our recent presidents who sought to fundamentally transform America. Community organizers find an area where there is resentment between people, and they agitate intentionally to rub it raw. Eventually, those people will be at war with each other. They will cry for a substitute. They will want a utopia. What is this utopia? Marxist communism. Numerous cultures have fallen this way, and this utopia has cost 100 million lives to date. Class warfare is hard to sell in America, though, because in other countries, the station into which you're born is the station into which you stay until you die. But not in America. You can come to America, and with hard work and ingenuity, you can rise to the top, or conversely, you can fall due to bad decisions. And there's a reason people risk their lives to come to America. They are running from something, the utopias they were promised in their countries. These people know that once they come to the U.S. and become U.S. citizens, they enjoy the full rights of this land of opportunity. So though it is hard to sell class warfare in America, you can sell racial tension, and that is what we are seeing today. Antifa and BLM are two groups that have been on the streets in what the mainstream media calls peaceful protests, and they have done a lot of damage. Antifa claims to be anti-fascist. This is a misnomer. The definition of fascism is a government system led by a dictator having complete power, forcibly oppressing opposition and criticism, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc., and emphasizing the aggressive nationalism and often racism. The symbol Antifa uses commonly, and you'll see this in their riots and their flags, depicts an anarchist flag overlaying a socialist flag. It is based on the logo of the German Antifa movement, which was originally established in the 1930s by Stalinist Communist Party of Germany. Black Lives Matter sounds nice, but that's not what the organization is about. And I will note that they've scrubbed their website because it got a lot of flack for putting the truth out there. The three founders, who are all women, are trained Marxists and friends of communist dictators. Their stated goals are to destroy the nuclear family, burn down America, and rebuild it in a communist image. Enter critical race theory. If we remember what Martin Luther King Jr. said, I have a dream that someday my children will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, we are going in the completely opposite direction. And Dr. Andrew Wood, senior pastor of Sugar Land Bible Church, put together this comparison of what the Bible says compared to critical race theory. Critical race theory makes race the lens through which its proponents analyze all aspects of American life. Critical race theory underpins identity politics, an ongoing effort to reimagine the U.S. as a nation driven by radical racial groups, each with specific claims on victimization. In critical race theory, there are two groups, victims and oppressors. Ultimately, critical race theory weakens the public and private bonds that create trust and allow for civic engagement. This is the Marxist utopia and ultimately leads to the enslavement of everyone and hell on earth. Alarmingly, this is the identical utopia being promoted by some of the most well-known evangelicals. A book that is extremely relevant to our time is Scott D. Allen's Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. And just inside the cover, he defines biblical justice and social justice. Biblical justice is conformity to God's moral standard as revealed in the Ten Commandments and the royal law, love your neighbor as yourself. Social justice is deconstructing traditional systems and structures deemed to be oppressive and redistributing power and resources from oppressors to their victims in the pursuit of equality of outcome. He notes that in recent years, a set of ideas rooted in postmodernism and neo-Marxist critical theory have merged into a comprehensive worldview. Labeled social justice by its advocates, it has radically redefined the popular understanding of justice. It purports to value equality and diversity and to champion the cause of the oppressed. Far too many Christians have little knowledge of this ideology and consequently do not see the danger. Many evangelical leaders confuse ideological social justice with biblical justice. And he states that it is imperative that as Christ's followers tasked with blessing their nations, we must wake up to the danger and carefully discern the difference between biblical justice and its destructive counterfeit. Karl Marx said, "The first battlefield is a rewriting of history. Take away the heritage of a people, and they are easily persuaded. The one who controls the flow of information and culture directs the narrative. The one who controls education can indoctrinate the young and the vulnerable. Progressives have been infiltrating our education system since the 20th century. A 2017 survey conducted with over 1,200 K-12 teachers found that only 27% of teachers identify as conservative. According to a 2018 study, the ratio of progressives to conservatives is now 13-1 in colleges and universities. The bottom line is this: progressives have the majority influence over curriculum. We're seeing this in our own county and our own state. In a recent interview, Alex Noon, author and award-winning international journalist, said that the history currently taught in public schools is a complete and total reversal of reality, and the root cause of the civil unrest that has spread across the nation because the curriculum incites children to hate America. So let's go back to the Declaration of Independence. The God-fearing founders of America created the most exceptional nation that has ever existed. It is not perfect, for it is created and still run by flawed human beings. However, it was founded on important and unique principles that come straight from the Bible. The key principles in the Declaration are: all men are created equal, we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights, and just governments are deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. The historical narrative now being taught in schools has reversed the three key principles in the Declaration of Independence. They now claim that the country's founding principles were slavery, oppression, racism, and white supremacy. Enter the 1619 Project. A notable example of this U.S. history reversal is a New York Times series called the 1619 Project that was created by New York Times reporter Nicole Sherry Hannah-Jones in 2019. The opening line of the essay that won her the Pulitzer Prize was, "Our democracy's founding ideals were false when they were written." Many top historians rang alarm bells about the, quote, glaring factual inaccuracies in the 1619 Project, which attempts to, quote, reframe the country's history by suggesting America's true founding was when the first slaves arrived in 1619. Historians' concerns, unfortunately, though legitimate, were largely ignored, and several public schools proceeded to implement it as part of their curriculum. And the 1619 Project has become a favorite tool of the left's cancel culture. Communist dictator Vladimir Lenin said, "Give me just one generation of youth, and I'll transform the whole world." In October 2020, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation released its annual report on U.S. attitudes towards socialism, communism, and collectivism. They found that a concerning amount of millennials, which is anyone between 1981 and 1996, and Gen Zers, anyone born after 1996, are in support of eliminating capitalism in favor of socialism. Also, an astounding number of Gen Zers have warmed up to Marxism in the past year, going from 6% in 2019 to an inconceivable 30% in 2020. Clearly, these youths do not know world history. To date, communism has cost over 100 million lives and is not the utopia that they think it is. So this is a powerful statement from a Fairfax County public school teacher.
Fairfax County public school teacher, and I'm going to give a message of encouragement to parents and teachers and students who are too afraid to come and speak forward. Parents, the longer that you wait and you don't hold your child's schools accountable gives these guys more time to dictate what's best for your child's physical, mental, and emotional health. Don't be afraid to speak out for your kids because they are voiceless and they rely on you. You should be afraid of them rooting for socialism by the time they get to middle school. Teachers, it may seem that our careers have come to a dead end, but I'm here to remind you, we don't work for the school board. We work to mold the next generation of well-rounded American patriots. So don't give up, because it is up to us. Students, you are on the front lines of these indoctrination camps. Challenge the staff when you're presented with a ludicrous statement, and do not allow anybody to tell you that you cannot accomplish anything because of your skin color or to hate yourself because of your skin color. Students, it is up to you to be the next generation of victims or victors. And finally, to the board, this isn't over, and your policies are just as...
And they cut her mic. So Dorothy Sayre, who has appeared as C.S. Lewis, spoke about the lost tools of learning. She said that though modern education may succeed in teaching its pupils subjects, it often fails on the whole in teaching students how to think. They learn everything except the art of learning. Modern education concentrates on the teaching of subjects, leaving the method of thinking, arguing, and expressing one's conclusions to be picked up by the student as she goes along. Well, we know worse now, it's become indoctrination systems. She speaks of the trivium, which consists of 3 parts: grammar, which is the whole system and structure of language; dialectic, the art of investigating or discussing the truth of opinions; and rhetoric, the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, in that order. It is intended to teach students the proper use of the tools of learning before they are applied to specific subjects. Once the tools have been well and truly learned, they are available for any student and any study they may wish to pursue. The goal of education should be the proper training of the mind to encounter and deal with any problem the world may throw at a person. The tools of learning are the same in any and every subject, and the person who knows how to use them gets the mastery of a new subject much more rapidly and much faster than those who do not know these tools. The sole and true end of education is to teach individuals how to learn for themselves. Hence, it is critical that they be taught the tools of learning so that they can be lifelong learners. So we wonder, what is the source of truth?
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about the irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The
sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Well, for one, they don't seem to understand we're a constitutional republic. So what is the source of truth? I give you a hint. It is not the television programming. So we all know the source of truth is the Bible. We read the Bible so that we know what the Bible says and what God says in his word so that we will not be outwitted by Satan. We must protect ourselves and our children from the prominent cultural narrative that seeks to destroy us from within. So we are presently in a war for America's soul. God has blessed us to live in America, which is truly the last best hope of earth. If America falls, there is no place for freedom-loving people to go. Our Christian faith and spiritual wisdom and discernment are our greatest weapons in this war. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." We are also in a war for the souls of our children. We must be vigilant against the erosion of parental rights and religious freedom. We must educate our children in truth and shine our light to others in order to save our nation and bring hope to a lost world. There has never been a better time to homeschool our children. And some verses of encouragement. 1 John 4:4 says, "He who is in you is greater than he who is in the world." And John 16:33 says, "I have said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world." And no, yes, we are in the beginning of the end times, but we are called for a time such as this.